say a bit about a little later. We're really, really happy to have him. He's going to give us some remarks after we watch the speech, and then we will have maybe about a half hour of question and answers with him discussing things with the audience. So without any further delay, why don't we start with President Kennedy's speech?
Support. There are few earthly things more beautiful than a university, wrote John Masefield in his tribute to English universities, and his words are equally true today. He did not refer to towers or to campuses. He admired the splendid beauty of a university because it was, he said, a place where those who hate ignorance may strive to know, where those who perceive truth may strive to make others see. I have therefore chosen this time and place to discuss a topic on which ignorance too often abounds and the truth too rarely perceived, and that is the most important topic on earth: peace. What kind of a peace do I mean, and what kind of a peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana enforced on the world by American weapons of war, not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I am talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, but peace in all time. I speak of peace because of the new face of war. Total war makes no sense in an age where great powers can maintain large and relatively invulnerable nuclear forces and refuse to surrender without resort to those forces. It makes no sense in an age where a single nuclear weapon contains almost 10 times the explosive force delivered by all the Allied air forces in the Second World War. It makes no sense in an age when the deadly poisons produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed to the far corners of the globe and to generations yet unborn. Today, the expenditure of billions of dollars every year on weapons acquired for the purpose of making sure we never need them is essential to the keeping of peace. But surely the acquisition of such idle stockpiles, which can only destroy and never create, is not the only, much less the most efficient, means of assuring peace. I speak of peace, therefore, as the necessary, rational end of rational men. I realize the pursuit of peace is not as dramatic as the pursuit of war, and frequently the words of the pursuers fall on deaf ears, but we have no more urgent task. Some say that it is useless to speak of peace or world law or world disarmament, and that it will be useless until the leaders of the Soviet Union adopt a more enlightened attitude. I hope they do. I believe we can help them do it. But I also believe that we must re-examine our own attitudes as individuals and as a nation, for our attitude is as essential as theirs. And every graduate of this school, every thoughtful citizen who despairs of war and wishes to bring peace should begin by looking inward, by examining his own attitude towards the possibilities of peace, towards the Soviet Union, towards the course of the Cold War, and towards freedom and peace here at home. First, examine our attitude towards peace itself. Too many of us think it is impossible. Too many think it is unreal. But that is a dangerous, defeatist belief. It leads to the conclusion that war is inevitable, that mankind is doomed, that we are gripped by forces we cannot control. We need not accept that view. Our problems are man-made. Therefore, they can be solved by man, and man can be as big as he wants. No problem of human destiny is beyond human beings. Man's reason and spirit have often solved the seemingly unsolvable, and we believe they can do it again. I am not referring to the absolute, infinite concept of universal peace and goodwill, of which some fantasies and fanatics dream. I do not deny the value of hopes and dreams, but we merely invite discouragement and incredulity by making that our only and immediate goal. Let us focus instead on a more practical, more attainable peace, based not on a sudden revolution in human nature, but on a gradual evolution in human institutions, on a series of concrete actions and effective agreements which are in the interests of all concerned. There is no single simple key to this peace, no grand or magic formula to be adopted by one or two powers. Genuine peace must be the product of many nations, the sum of many acts. It must be dynamic, not static, changing to meet the challenge of each new generation. For peace is a process, a way of solving problems. With such a peace, there will still be quarrels and conflicting interests, as there are within families and nations. World peace, like community peace, does not require that each man love his neighbor. It requires only that they live together in mutual tolerance, submitting their disputes to a just and peaceful settlement. And history teaches us that enmities between nations, as between individuals, do not last forever. However fixed our likes and dislikes may seem, the tide of time and events will often bring surprising changes in the relations between nations and neighbors. So let us persevere. Peace need not be impractical, and war need not be inevitable. By defining our goal more clearly, by making it seem more manageable and less remote, we can help all people to see it, to draw hope from it, and to move irresistibly towards it. And second, let us re-examine our attitude towards the Soviet Union. It is discouraging to think that their leaders may actually believe what their propagandists write. It is discouraging to read a recent authoritative Soviet text on military strategy and find on page after page wholly baseless and incredible claims, such as the allegation that American imperialist circles are preparing to unleash different types of war, that there is a very real threat of a preventative war being unleashed by American imperialists against the Soviet Union, and that the political aims, and I quote, of the American imperialists are to enslave economically and politically the European and other capitalist countries and to achieve world domination by means of aggressive war, unquote. Truly, as it was written long ago, the wicked flee when no man pursueth. Yet it is sad to read these Soviet statements, to realize the extent of the gulf between us. But it is also a warning to the American people not to fall into the same trap as the Soviets, not to see only a distorted and desperate view of the other side, not to see conflict as inevitable, accommodation as impossible, and communication as nothing more than an exchange of threats. No government or social system is so evil that its people must be considered as lacking in virtue. As Americans, we find communism profoundly repugnant as a negation of personal freedom and dignity. But we can still hail the Russian people for their many achievements in science and space, in economic and industrial growth, in culture, in acts of courage. Among the many traits the peoples of our two countries have in common, none is stronger than our mutual abhorrence of war. Almost unique among the major world powers, we have never been at war with each other. And no nation in the history of battle ever suffered more than the Soviet Union in the Second World War. At least 20 million lost their lives. Countless millions of homes and families were burned or sacked. A third of the nation's territory, including 2/3 of its industrial base, was turned into a wasteland, a loss equivalent to the destruction of this country east of Chicago. Today, should total war ever break out again, no matter how, our two countries will be the primary target. It is an ironic but accurate fact that the two strongest powers are the two in the most danger of devastation. All we have built, all we have worked for, would be destroyed in the first 24 hours. And even in the Cold War, which brings burdens and dangers to so many countries, including this nation's closest allies, our two countries bear the heaviest burdens. For we are both devoting massive sums of money to weapons that could be better devoted to combat ignorance, poverty, and disease. We are both caught up in a vicious and dangerous cycle, with suspicion on one side breeding suspicion on the other, and new weapons begetting counterweapons. In short, both the United States and its allies, and the Soviet Union and its allies, have a mutually deep interest in a just and genuine peace and in holding the arms race. Agreements to this end are in the interests of the Soviet Union as well as ours. And even the most hostile nations can be relied upon to accept and keep those treaty obligations, and only those treaty obligations, which are in their own interest. So let us not be blind to our differences, but let us also direct attention to our common interests and the means by which those differences can be resolved. And if we cannot end now our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's futures, and we are all mortal. Third, let us re-examine our attitude towards the Cold War, remembering we're not engaged in a debate, seeking to pile up debating points. We are not here distributing blame or pointing the finger of judgment. We must deal with the world as it is, and not as it might have been had the history of the last 18 years been different. We must therefore persevere in the search for peace, in the hope that constructive changes within the communist bloc might bring within reach solutions which now seem beyond us. We must conduct our affairs in such a way that it becomes in the communist interests to agree on a genuine peace, and above all, while defending our own vital interests. Nuclear powers must avert those confrontations which bring an adversary to a choice of either a humiliating retreat or a nuclear war. To adopt that kind of course in the nuclear age would be evidence only of the bankruptcy of our policy or of a collective death wish for the world. To secure these ends, America's weapons are non-provocative, carefully controlled, designed to deter, and capable of selective use. Our military forces are committed to peace and disciplined in self-restraint. Our diplomats are instructed to avoid unnecessary irritants and purely rhetorical hostility, for we can seek a relaxation of tensions without relaxing our guard. And for our part, we do not need to use threats to prove we are resolute. We do not need to jam foreign broadcasts out of fear our faith will be eroded. We are unwilling to impose our system on any unwilling people, but we are willing and able to engage in peaceful competition with any people on earth. Meanwhile, we seek to strengthen the United Nations to help solve its financial problems, to make it a more effective instrument for peace, to develop it into a genuine world security system, a system capable of resolving disputes on the basis of law, of ensuring the security of the large and the small, and of creating conditions under which arms can finally be abolished. At the same time, we seek to keep peace inside the non-communist world, where many nations, all of them our friends, are divided over issues which weaken Western unity, which invite communist intervention, or which threaten to erupt into war. Our efforts in West New Guinea, in the Congo, in the Middle East, and the Indian subcontinent have been persistent and patient, despite criticism from both sides. We have also tried to set an example for others by seeking to adjust small but significant differences with our own closest neighbors in Mexico and Canada. Speaking of other nations, I wish to make one point clear. We are bound to many nations by alliances. These alliances exist because our concern and theirs substantially overlap. Our commitment to defend Western Europe and West Berlin, for example, stands undiminished because of the identity of our vital interests. The United States will make no deal with the Soviet Union at the expense of other nations and other peoples, not merely because they are our partners, but also because their interests and ours converge. Our interests converge, however, not only in defending the frontiers of freedom, but in pursuing the paths of peace. It is our hope and the purpose of Allied policy to convince the Soviet Union that she too should let each nation choose its own future, so long as that choice does not interfere with the choices of others. The communist drive to impose their political and economic system on others is the primary cause of world tension today. For there can be no doubt that if all nations could refrain from interfering in the self-determination of others, the peace would be much more assured. This will require a new effort to achieve world law, a new context for world discussions. It will require increased understanding between the Soviets and ourselves. An increased understanding will require increased contact and communication. One step in this direction is the proposed arrangement for a direct line between Moscow and Washington to avoid on each side the dangerous delays, misunderstandings, and misreadings of others' actions which might occur at a time of crisis. We have also been talking in Geneva about our first step measures of arms controls, designed to limit the intensity of the arms race and reduce the risk of accidental war. Our primary long-range interest in Geneva, however, is general and complete disarmament, designed to take place by stages, permitting parallel political developments to build the new institutions of peace, which would take the place of arms. The pursuit of disarmament has been an effort of this government since the 1920s. It has been urgently sought by the past 3 administrations. And however dim the prospects are today, we intend to continue this effort, to continue it in order that all countries, including our own, can better grasp what the problems and the possibilities of disarmament are. The only major area of these negotiations where the end is in sight, yet where a fresh start is badly needed, is in a treaty to outlaw nuclear tests. The conclusion of such a treaty, so near and yet so far, would check the spiraling arms race in one of its most dangerous areas. It would place the nuclear powers in a position to deal more effectively with one of the greatest hazards which man faces in 1963, the further spread of nuclear arms. It would increase our security. It would decrease the prospects of war. Surely this goal is sufficiently important to require our steady pursuit, yielding neither to the temptation to give up the whole effort, nor the temptation to give up our insistence on vital and responsible safeguards. I'm taking this opportunity, therefore, to announce two important decisions in this regard. First, Chairman Khrushchev, Prime Minister Macmillan, and I have agreed that high-level discussions will shortly begin in Moscow, looking towards early agreement on a comprehensive test ban treaty. Our hope must be tempered Our hopes must be tempered with the caution of history, but with our hopes go the hopes of all mankind. Second, to make clear our good faith and solemn convictions on this matter, declare that the United States does not propose to conduct nuclear tests in the atmosphere so long as other states do not do so. We will not be the first to resume. Such a declaration is no substitute for a formal binding treaty, but I hope it will help us achieve one. Nor would such a treaty be a substitute for disarmament, but I hope it will help us achieve it. Finally, my fellow Americans, let us examine our attitude towards peace and freedom here at home. The quality and spirit of our own society must justify and support our efforts abroad. We must show it in the dedication of our own lives. As many of you who are graduating today will have an opportunity to do by serving without pay in the Peace Corps abroad or in the proposed National Service Corps here at home. But wherever we are, we must all, in our daily lives, live up to the age-old faith that peace and freedom walk together. In too many of our cities today, the peace is not secure because freedom is incomplete. It is the responsibility of the executive branch at all levels of government, local, state, and national, to provide and protect that freedom for all of our citizens by all means within our authority. It is the responsibility of the legislative branch at all levels, wherever the authority is not now adequate, to make it adequate. And it is the responsibility of all citizens in all sections of this country to respect the rights of others and respect the law of the land. All this is not unrelated to world peace. When a man's way please the Lord, the Scriptures tell us, he maketh even his enemies to be at peace with him. And is not peace, in the last analysis, basically a matter of human rights? The right to live out our lives without fear of devastation, the right to breathe air as nature provided it, the right of future generations to a healthy existence. While we proceed to safeguard our national interests, let us also safeguard human interests. And the elimination of war and arms is clearly in the interests of both. No treaty, however much it may be to the advantage of all, however tightly it may be worded, can provide absolute security against the risks of deception and evasion. But it can, if it is sufficiently effective in its enforcement, and it is sufficiently in the interest of its signers, offer far more security and far fewer risks than an unabated, uncontrolled, unpredictable arms race. The United States, as the world knows, will never start a war. We do not want a war, We do not now expect a war. This generation of Americans has already had enough, more than enough, of war and hate and oppression. We shall be prepared if others wish it. We shall be alert to try to stop it. But we shall also do our part to build a world of peace where the weak are safe and the strong are just. We are not helpless before that task or hopeless of its success. Confident and unafraid, we must labor on, not towards a strategy of annihilation, but towards a strategy of peace.
Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. I want to say a few words about our speaker tonight, David Hartsough, but before I do, I also wanted to introduce Steve Engel, who's also a member of our committee and is going to help coordinate the discussion after David's remarks. David Hartsough is a lifelong peace and human rights activist who has embodied the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. His book, Waging Peace: Global Adventures of a Lifelong Activist, recounts many of his experiences as a child and an adult in this effort. He's a co-founder of World Beyond War and a co-founder of the Nonviolent Peace Force. He was a participant in lunch counter sit-ins during the Civil Rights Movement and has made numerous peacemaking trips to the Soviet Union and Russia, Nicaragua, El Salvador, the Philippines, Kosovo, Iran, and Palestine, and Israel, including Gaza. He's been arrested over 150 times for his nonviolent work for peace and justice. He worked for 25 years with the American Friends Service Committee and the Friends Committee on National Legislation, and he currently lives in San Francisco, California. This past year, David was selected to be the person to present his friend, Daniel Ellsberg, with the Sam Adams Award. Ray McGovern established Sam Adams Associates and the Sam Adams Award to quote, reward.
Hey, Don Joaquin, I am realizing that you and some others.
Please mute that person. The award was created to recognize those intelligence officials who demonstrated a commitment to truth and integrity, no matter the consequences. I think it's fair to say that David Hartsough has lived a life of commitment to peace, human rights, truth, and integrity, no matter the consequences. And I'm really, really pleased that he's joined us tonight as our commentator. So it's all yours, David.
Thank you, Marty. And thank all of you for joining us this afternoon, evening. And I see many dear friends from over many years, some of whom I've been arrested with. Well, I'd like to share some of my reflections on my own life as a peace and justice activist, and then share some thoughts about what lessons we can learn from JFK's amazing peace speech today, if we want to live in a peaceful world and prevent World War III. I need to say that I was influenced by some powerful examples of other courageous people. My dad took my brother and me to Montgomery, Alabama during the Montgomery bus boycott. And we met thousands and thousands of Black people who, rather than ride the segregated buses, continued to get up an hour early each morning to walk to work. And even when Black churches were bombed, refused to bomb the white churches, saying we need to love one another. And when I was That was when I was 15. When I was 18, some of my friends joined the voyage of the Golden Rule to try to go into the nuclear bomb testing area in the Pacific. And each of them wrote a statement saying they were really willing to risk their lives to try to stop this madness, the nuclear arms race to nuclear testing. And that moved me very, very deeply. And I decided to help organize and join the Walk for Peace from Philadelphia to the United Nations, urging all nations to stop their nuclear bomb testing. Well, in the early 60s, I was a student at Howard University. This was when segregation was still very strong in the South. Blacks could not eat in restaurants, stay at motels, drink from drinking fountains, children going to the parks. It was, I mean, people were, it was an apartheid system, let's put it that way. And at Howard, we went down to Arlington, Virginia, where everything was still segregated. And like others in the freedom movement throughout the South, went into a people's drugstore to get something to eat. And instead of getting something to eat, they closed the lunch counter, and we sat there for 2 days waiting for something to eat. And it was the most challenging 2 days of my life. People spat in our faces, put lit cigarettes down our shirts, punched us in the stomach. The American Nazi Party came and threatened us. And late on the second day, I heard a guy come up from behind me saying, "If you don't get out of the store in 2 seconds, I'm going to stab this through your heart." And this guy, I looked, he had this terrible look of hatred in his eyes. And I said, "Friend, I'll still try to love you, but do what you feel is right." And his hand began to drop, and he left the store. So for a young 20-year-old, that was a powerful experience. Well, there was 500 people gathered outside heckling us. And we went to the front door of this People's Drugstore and made an appeal to the religious and community leaders of Arlington to use their influence to get the eating facilities open to everyone. And we said, if nothing changes in a week, we'll be back. And 6 days later, we got a call that the religious and community leaders had met, talked with the business leaders, and there'd be an end to segregation to the eating facilities in Arlington. So that was the most important lesson of my life, that when something terrible is happening, instead of cursing the television set or the president or segregation or war, find some other people that believe as deeply as you do about something and go and challenge it. Put your bodies on the line to try to stop it. Well, during the Berlin crisis in 1961, I was studying in East and West Berlin. As far as I know, I'm the only American that was studying in East and West Berlin. And so I would ride my bicycle over to East Berlin in the mornings to the Humboldt University, and I heard a lot of communist propaganda. And I would challenge some of that propaganda, and they called me a capitalist warmonger. And I biked back to the West in the afternoon and heard a lot of anti-communist propaganda. And I challenged a lot of that, and they called me a communist conspirator. And right there in Berlin, it was not just a place that the US and Soviet Union were threatening nuclear war. It was people on different sides of the city were getting totally different information about each other. And as Kennedy warned, rather than just thinking the other side is the epitome of evil and we're all good. I mean, that was what was happening right there in Berlin. That's what is unfortunately still happening in the world. between US and Russia. Well, in the early 60s, I organized and led 3 groups of students to Russia, the Soviet Union, to get to know the Russian people, to try to understand one another, build people, build peace from the bottom up. And then I shared those, and I heard what Kennedy said, how deeply the Russian people hated war and had suffered so much. I then shared those experiences all over the US. I wrote 2 books, Discovering Another Russia and Backyard Russia, Getting to Know the Russian People. I had demonstrated, a month after we met with President Kennedy, I met, I was praying for end of nuclear bomb testing out in front of the White House. And the people came up and said, why are you demonstrating against our peaceful bomb tests? Go to Russia. So later that summer, I was in Russia, in the Soviet Union. And I did, together with one of the other people from our group, we demonstrated in Red Square in front of the Kremlin with signs that said exactly what we had in front of the White House, but in Russian, which said bomb tests kill people. And the Russian people came up and said, why are you demonstrating against our peaceful bombs? Go to the United States, that's where they need it. Well, the police came on and threatened us with 20 years in prison if we didn't stop demonstrating against their peaceful bombs. And I said, well, thank you for warning us. But if this nuclear arms race continues and we have nuclear war, that's going to be a well of a lot worse than 20 years. Well, they said they had to go and talk with their superiors, and luckily they never came back. During the Vietnam War, I was a Quaker lobbyist in Washington to try to stop that war. Because so many lies were coming out of the White House about that war, we worked to try to get the truth to Congress people in the face of all the lies. One of the projects that we as Quakers did was reading the names of the war dead on the Capitol steps. And each Wednesday at noon, we'd be out there reading the names of the war dead, and within 10 minutes, they would arrest us. And on the 3rd week, we had invited some members of Congress to join us, which they did. And when our group of Quakers were all arrested, the Congress people had congressional immunity and kept reading the names until they went through 30-some thousand people. Well, that got national publicity. Life magazine had a special issue with a story about each soldier that had been killed that month, their photographs. And there were demonstrations all across the country reading the names of the war dead. And then we had the Vietnam moratorium, where thousands of people all over the country demonstrated in their own communities against the war, the Vietnam mobilization. And a film was just made, I don't know if some of you saw it, on PBS in March, called The Movement and the Madman on PBS American Experience. And what it shows that the peace movement played a crucial role in stopping President Nixon and Kissinger from using their nuclear weapons on North Vietnam. And by 72, when the US was beginning to bomb Hanoi and Haiphong, places where millions of people were living, we started what we called a People's Blockade, blocking US ships and aircraft carriers, taking bombs and munitions to South Vietnam. In Leonardo, New Jersey, we blocked a ship called the USS Nitro. And on the sixth day, I think we were out there in our canoes blocking. On the seventh day, early in that day, we could see the anchor being lifted and it was getting ready to leave. And all on the decks were cartons, massive cartons of napalm and anti-personnel weapons. And as we paddled to try to stay right in front of that ship, 7 sailors jumped off the ship into the ocean to join us. And that made the evening news, the New York Times. And when we blocked the USS America and aircraft carrier in Virginia, and it began to try to sail through our blockade, the last hour before it left, 50 sailors went AWOL, left the ship. And I like to believe that our courage gave courage to those sailors, and their courage gave courage to a lot of other people in the military to stop sending these lies about being involved in this horrendous war. And if you've seen the film Sir, No, Sir, it shows the people played it, or the soldiers.
David, you're muted. David, you have to unmute. Go ahead.
So you heard me so far?
Yeah, go back about maybe 15 seconds.
Oh, what I just said, again, our courage gave courage to people in the military to stop cooperating with this insane, tragic war. And Sir, No, Sir kind of shares the story of how the people in the military refusing to obey orders played an important role. Now our visit was with Kennedy in the White House. On May 1st, 1962, we were a delegation of 6 Quakers, and we were encouraging Kennedy to take leadership in ending the nuclear arms race and challenging the Russians to a peace race, and to take concrete steps like ending nuclear weapons testing. And as you see, 13 months later, that was exactly what he did in his American University speech. Kennedy, I mean, one of the things that really impressed us, and he was sitting in his rocking chair next to the fireplace. We were in a small semicircle around him. He was listening. He was not pretending like he was Mr. Big Shot, president of the United States, and we were nobodies. And after we talked a little bit about the need for peace, he said, you know, I've been reading The Guns of August, where all the countries of Europe were arming to the teeth to try to avoid that war. And that was exactly what got us into that war. And then he said, it is scary how similar the situation was then to what it is right now. That's 1962. And of course, several months later, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the world came to the brink of nuclear war. And I would say it's even more dangerous now. And of course, everybody is arming to the teeth again. China, the people of China were facing massive starvation at that time. And we suggested to the president that he send food to the people of China instead of spending taxpayers' money just to store it in silos in Kansas or wherever it was. And he says, you mean we should feed the enemy? And we said, yes, that's exactly what we mean. Kennedy, in response to our request for him to take more leadership on really moving us toward peace, said, you know, the military industrial complex is very powerful in this country. If you are serious, you'll need to build a much more powerful movement to support me in taking that leadership. When the secretary came in to tell Kennedy that his next appointment was waiting, he said, "Tell him to wait. I'm learning something from these Quakers." So that was quite an affirmation. So the lessons learned from Kennedy's speech, I mean, it's really profound. One was, of course, all good is not on one side, and all evil on the other. And in Ukraine, for instance, the lie of unprovoked Russian attack on Ukraine, we need to put ourselves in the shoes of the others, the enemy. How would Russians feel with NATO on their borders, doing massive military exercises with thousands of troops, fighter jets, Navy ships?
You're muted again, David. For some reason, you have to unmute.
I'll move this a little further from me. Sorry. After the U.S. had promised not to move 1 inch eastward beyond Germany, and are now on the Russian border, and had invited Ukraine to join NATO. If we put ourselves in the Russian shoes, I think we would understand why Russia does not want Ukraine in NATO, and for Ukraine to be neutral. How would the US feel if Russia had military bases in Canada and Mexico? If we really want peace, we need to look at what is in our common interests and what will make us all secure. US and Russia, US and China, US and Iran, etc. The US needs to take concrete initiatives for peace, as JFK did in stopping, unilaterally stopping US nuclear bomb testing, as long as other nations did not resume nuclear testing. As Kennedy told us, our job is to build a powerful movement to push the US to stop the nuclear arms race. And in the 1980s, we had a massive anti-nuclear movement, 1 million people in New York City. And all over the world, people were demonstrating. The film The Day After was seen by 100 million people in the United States and 200 million in Russia, and even converted President Reagan about the dangers of nuclear war. And he'd been joking about, ready to bomb in 10 minutes. We need to rethink how to get real security, not through 800 military bases around the world, but in good faith negotiations to step back from the brink and get shared security for all. The US and Russia and Ukraine and China, and with Israel and Palestine. There's no security in nuclear weapons. The only real security is in the abolition of all nuclear weapons. The US should sign the treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons and encourage all nuclear weapon states to do the same. In terms of the Cuban Missile Crisis, we need a president like Kennedy who courageously goes against the advice of the military-industrial complex and his hawkish advisors, and works for real peace for all nations and peace for all time, makes that a priority. In the Cuban Missile Crisis in '62, Kennedy, I already said that. If he had listened to his hawkish advisors, national security advisors, we would have ended up with nuclear war in the Soviet Union. And Kennedy's assassination may have had something to do with the conversion that he had as a result of that Cuban Missile Crisis. Conversion from war hawk to a peace warrior. Kennedy also decided to withdraw all US troops from Vietnam, support neutrality for Laos, support the African liberation movements, etc. He supported the UN, not undermined it or sabotage it, with vetoes for proposals for total ceasefire in Israel-Palestine war. Kennedy's goals was shared security for all nations. Years later, Gorbachev proposed a common European home. How do we make change happen? When the Warsaw Pact in Eastern Europe was disbanded, NATO should have been disbanded. And there's a short story about voting rights campaign in the US. When Martin Luther King came back from getting the Nobel Peace Prize, he stopped in the White House to talk with Lyndon Johnson and said, "Mr. President, we need a voting rights bill." Johnson said, we just got a civil rights bill. Congress would never go for it. King didn't mess around much or any longer in Washington, went south with SNCC and many others, organized the voting rights campaign, where thousands of African Americans went to the registration places, to the city halls, whatever, to register to vote. Instead of getting registered, the police brought their billy clubs and tear gas and fire hoses. And that was on TV news every night for months. And within several months, we had a voting rights bill. All wars are based on lies. Vietnam, Central America, Afghanistan, Iraq, Ukraine, etc. We need to press the mainstream media to not just repeat the lies coming from the administration. In 2022, there was a tentative agreement to end the war in Ukraine, made between Ukraine and Russia. The US, unfortunately, and Britain vetoed it. If we need to stand for peace, not more war and ever more weapons to get, quote, peace. We need to stop the war on terror, which has been a total disaster and has cost $8 trillion and over 1 million people dead. And we have ever more terrorists. We need to stop Pax Americana, endless wars, 800 military bases around the world, modernizing our nuclear weapons stockpile and delivery systems at a cost of $1.7 trillion. We need to stop the US and NATO massive military exercises on Russia's borders that are happening right now. The US needs to abide by the law of war, by the rule of law, excuse me. We need to respect and support the UN, stop using the veto in the Security Council. In Gaza, we need to support a permanent ceasefire and stop sending weapons and military support to Israel. Demand that Israel stop bombing and invasion and occupation of Gaza and support a real peace and justice in Palestine and Israel, where there can be human dignity and security for all Palestinians and all Israelis. In China, we need to have the goal of common security for both China and the US. There's no security for anyone in a nuclear war. We need to put diplomacy, not military confrontation, as our first choice of how to deal with problems. We need to stop the US military patrolling and flying off the coast of our military planes off the coast of China. We need to realize that the Pacific Ocean is not an American lake. As Kennedy said regarding the lead up to World War I, if everyone prepares for war, we will get war. Instead of the US and China both modernizing our nuclear weapons, we need to put those trillions of dollars in working together to make the conversion to a renewable energy world. And finally, in terms of what we can do, I co-founded World Beyond War, which is working for the abolition of all war, that we get security through negotiation, not military confrontation. Wars do not resolve conflicts. They plant the seeds of future wars and kill a lot of people in the process. We need to stop the mentality that we are the good guys and they are the devil, the new Hitler. We need to stop acting like the world is the US empire. So I invite you to go to the World Beyond War website and join tens of thousands of people in 197 countries working for an end of all war. And there's a book put out by World Beyond War called A Global Security System, an Alternative to War, which, you know, for people to say, well, what's the alternative? Well, it's here. And I'd like to remember Eisenhower's quote that I want to believe that the people of the world want peace so much that governments will have to get out of the way and let them have it. And finally, I'd like to just mention my book called Waging Peace, Global Adventures of a Lifelong Activist, put out by PM Press. It's also free as an audiobook. If you just look for YouTube, Waging Peace audiobook, you can get it for free. And finally, I'd just like to mention that in April, there'll be a film. I mentioned earlier the Day After film, which was the day after a nuclear war, which woke up the American people. The film called Television Event, and it's about the Day After film. It'll be shown on PBS American Experience on many PBS stations, which hopefully again can help wake up the American people. So thank you, that's a lot. But I'm really looking forward to your questions and comments. Great to see all my dear friends out there, as well as many new friends.
Okay, Marty, do you want me to begin with the questions?
Sure.
Yeah, first of all, before I forget, David, how do people get in touch with you? Do you have a website?
Well, I'll give you my email. It's just David R. Hartsough, HARTSOUGH @gmail. We do have a website called peaceworkersus.org.
Okay, I'm going to put that in the chat there. David R. Hartsough @gmail.com.
Yeah.
Great. And what's the website, David?
peaceworkersus.org. And there you'll find, you know, many of my talks and other excellent resources.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions in the chat. Anyone else, if you want to ask questions, just add them, put them in the chat, and I'll try to ask them in the order that they come up. So the first one is from Faisal Mansour, and the question is, what does Mr. Hartsough think about the use of the veto in the UN Security Council and the ongoing petition to expel the U.S. from the UN over its use of the veto over Gaza? And I think you've answered part of that already, but are you aware of a petition to expel the U.S. from the UN? I was not aware of that.
I haven't heard about it.
Okay.
I think we need to really strengthen the UN. I mean, the whole veto power was, you know, put in there after the Second World War by the people that are the governments that won the Second World War. And that's totally irrelevant now. It should be. And certainly we need to get rid of the veto power of, so the US or Russia or China or any of the victorious powers of Second World War cannot veto anything that is really going to challenge their policies.
Okay, and the second question is from Laurel Farnham, and Hold on one second here. Peace activists are and have been up against a solid media wall, so that access to the minds of the mainstream of Americans is blocked. How can this wall be breached? How can the media wall be breached?
Well, as I mentioned, we need to put all the pressure we can on the mainstream media. But I think one thing that is different now than during the Vietnam War days is there's a lot of alternative media. And Democracy Now! Is one that I really rely on for really getting a lot of different perspectives that never get into the mainstream news, and also through the internet. So I think the information is there if people search it for it. But, I mean, to me, the massive demonstrations that have been happening all around the country, around Gaza, and all around the world are crucial. But we ought to focus some of that on the media that keep spreading the lies and the half-truths, which, I mean, I think, was it Goebbels, somebody in Germany says, any country you can get the people to support the war effort, even democracies. You just tell some lies about the other side that they're evil and they will join the war. Well, we need to have the truth, not lies, and we have to demand that of our mainstream media. And democracy can only work if people know the truth.
Okay, I just want to ask again, if people do have questions, rather than raising your hand, if you can just put your questions in the chat. We also have another question from Laurel. Why are most of us on this call older, nearing the end of our lives? How can the minds and hearts of young people be reached with a core belief in peace?
Well, I think an unexpected positive that may come out of this whole crisis in Israel-Palestine is that younger people have woken up about that. And I mean, I was arrested a couple of weeks ago blocking at an Air Force base where they're loading bombs onto planes going over to Palestine or to Israel to drop on Gaza. And it was 90% young people. And I think that young people, and those people their consciousness is being raised about the whole institution of dropping on bombs, because your government doesn't like, somebody else's government. And hopefully that is going to expand into a deeper understanding of, war is an outmoded institution. And as Kennedy said, that's really going to end up with no security for anybody.
Okay, and Amar Ahmad had a question. How did you arrange a meeting with President Kennedy? What was your impression of JFK after you had met with him?
Well, there was a conference on peace and world security of 1,000 or so people. And we invited Kennedy to come and speak at that conference. And we got a message from his staff that he could not come, but he would welcome a delegation of people to come and talk with him in the White House. So, and I was the other people were all much older, weighty people. And I was, 20? Well, the next day I was going to turn 22 years old. And as I said, I was very favorably impressed that he really was listening and seemed to hear what we were saying. I mean, didn't agree with everything, but it was like you'd have around in your living room of talking with each other about deep concerns you have. And that's a very, very positive trait in this guy. I don't think we converted him there on the spot. And I think the Cuban Missile Crisis is what really converted him. And the last, most of a year of his life, he was going against most of his national security advisors on one thing after another. And that's why many of us believe that had something to do with him getting assassinated. You think how different, we probably wouldn't have had the whole Vietnam War. Anyway.
Okay, I have a question. There's a question here from Bob Spees, and actually this ties into a question I was thinking about during your talk, David. And Kennedy's speech, he talked about the danger of this cynicism that peace is impossible. It's a very dangerous belief that it's unrealistic, and I see this with my friends on social media. They just say, it's like world peace is some quixotic goal that just is unrealistic, and it's pointless to try to fight for that. And to relate to that, to tie in with that, is Bob Spees' question. A friend he's having an email debate with said, quote, appeasement with Russia and China will only lead to disaster, unquote. And Bob asks, what's the best way, if there is one, to try and educate him and others who share that point of view as to how wrong that belief is? That appeasement will only lead to disaster.
Well, first, if peace is unrealistic, is threatening nuclear war with Russia or China, which would likely lead to nuclear winter and over 5 billion people dying, including most people in the United States and Russia. Is that realistic? Is that a sensible way to try to get security? And I don't think that question is being asked, by our presidential candidates, by Congress people, by our mainstream media. It's our job to make sure that gets raised. But I think, the reason I was sharing about trying to look at the world from Russia's point of view, the West committed, and NATO leaders, the US leaders committed to not move NATO 1 inch eastward. And now that we have military bases surrounding Russia and invite Ukraine to join NATO, can we understand? It does not excuse Russia's invasion, but it helps understand why that is not acceptable to them. And I think the people that say that Putin is really out, if we don't stop him in Ukraine, he's going to take over Europe or many other countries. And that's what they were saying back in 1962 or 63 when Kennedy gave the speech. And that was the reason for the Vietnam War. If we don't stop them there, they're going to, march, keep marching toward Texas. And the same in the Central America wars. If we don't stop them down in El Salvador and Nicaragua, they'll be coming across the Texas border momentarily. Well, that is what is always said to dehumanize and to Hitlerize the opposition. And I'm sure there's some truth in no, I don't even think there's truth in it. But we just need to recognize that during the Second World War, the Japanese became enemies. The Japanese that were here, we put them in concentration camps. But anyway, I think that's a false understanding to feel that if we don't stop them in Ukraine or Taiwan or, you know, anywhere else, that they're going to be marching on toward the United States.
And this idea that peace is naive, like belief that we're all just going to get along and sit and sing kumbaya,
Oh,
that this is not realistic in the modern world. I hear that a lot.
and I mean, and that's not what, I mean, peace is not just kumbaya and that's what we talk about in this, which includes strengthening the UN, getting rid of the veto and all this kind of stuff. But if you just look at US policy, you know, in the last many years, our first tool that we use is military confrontation. I mean, and after 9/11 happened in this country, we went to war with one country after another, after another, after another, because somebody had attacked us. Well, that didn't resolve any of those problems. You know, lots of people got killed, dead. But as I said earlier, we've created many, many more terrorists. I mean, I would just say military confrontation, threatening, you know, nuclear war, has nothing to do with security. And it's really the opposite. And I think what Kennedy was talking about is we need to look at what is going to make for security for all of us. And that's, I mean, in a way, that's a radical idea, but it seems so sensible.
That makes a lot of sense the way you put it there. Yeah. Okay, we have a few more questions. We're going to try to get them all in. We have one caller, I think, calling on their cell phone who doesn't have access to the chat. So I'm going to unmute them, and maybe you could just briefly state your question. Are you there? Okay, I don't see them there. We're going to wait and see if they come back. Let's go to the next question here. How can this is from Alan Haber. How can civil society put itself more forward to call the war makers to put down the guns, pause, and come to the people's peace table to consider actual peace? So how do we, I guess, Alan's talking about the military industrial complex, the bomb makers. How do we convince them to put down their guns and talk peace?
The bomb makers. Okay.
He said the war makers to put down the guns, pause, and come to the people's peace table to consider actual peace.
Well, I think we just need to have some honest conversations about how do we get peace, and are our 800 military bases around the world really making us any safer? Are supplying the arms and the bombs and the fighter planes to Israel make really saving lives, you know, are making Israel any safer, let alone the people of Palestine any safer? Is this working, or are there alternative ways to try to resolve conflicts and to achieve security? I mean, we call it a national security. You know, that's what the Pentagon is supposedly about. But and the State Department is supposed to be diplomacy, resolving conflicts peacefully. But it seems like the State Department is more a subdivision of the Pentagon, and lining up other nations to support, you know, our militaristic ambitions.
Okay, I think I have the person now.
If
go
we're
ahead.
honest conversation about that, you know, people in government and people in the American people could make a sensible decision. And so we need to help make that real that dialogue really happen.
Okay. Okay, I have the person on the line now. Could you go ahead and ask her a question?
David, this is Stephen Houseworth from North Carolina. Thank you for letting your life speak. My question is about Kennedy's speech, which happened in May or early in 1963, 6 months before he died. Were there other speeches that were relevant to peace that he offered?
Yes, his speech at the UN was really profound. And I forget whether that was 63 or 62. I mean, I think especially 62 and 63 were excellent. And there were other speeches, I don't have them in my head. Perhaps Marty or Steve might know of others.
Well, that same weekend that he gave the commencement address, he also gave a major address on civil rights,
Yes,
domestic situation, which was quite a radical and deep speech, which is also very, very important. And I think that his speech to the UN was in the fall of 63, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah.
Ray McGovern has a question for David. Did the fact that you are a Quaker have anything to do with your activism? I think I know the answer to that one.
Well, yes. And I mean, it's partly some of the people I got to know who were also Quakers. Like I mentioned, George Willoughby and Bill Bigelow, the people on the Golden Rule, really acting on their beliefs to risk their own lives to stop this nuclear madness. But getting to know people like Byron Rustin and A.J. Musty and a lot of people. I mean, I was born in Ohio and also lived, so I grew up there in my early years and then also in Iowa. But I just wonder if I had never met some of these amazing folks, and you know, many of them were Quakers, certainly not all, what my life would have been like. I didn't have some role models. But I think Quakers, I think, try to practice what we preach. And, you know, we try to speak truth to power. And we try to live by our values and our beliefs. It's not just something you do for an hour on Sunday, but it's something you do with your life.
David, in your book, I think you mentioned a situation where you got into a conflict with the Quaker institution and they invited you to leave and you decided, yeah, I want to leave. So that it's not always a Quaker institution that lives up to your principles. Is that right?
Yeah, I was at a Quaker school. I think there were a couple of people on the line that actually were classmates of mine. But I had started a Students for Peace group, and I had organized people to go to. I don't need to go into all the depths of it, but to go door to door with a questionnaire. What do you think about U.S. nuclear bomb testing? And a community survey, and had also a worship group that met before breakfast. And but they accused me of neglecting my spiritual responsibility and said, Hartsough, shape up or ship out 2 weeks before graduation. So yeah, I mean, Quaker institutions like the American Friends Service Committee and Friends Committee on National Legislation, and Quaker work camps, where I really got to know people in the inner city of Philadelphia that that were living really terribly. I mean, all this was very important in my becoming who I am. So thank you for that question.
Okay, we have, in the limited time we have left, we have a few questions. So, in the interest of brevity, I'm going to combine the next two questions. One is from Lauren Gilbert, and one is from Andrea LeBlanc. Lauren asks, why are our politicians so supportive of arm manufacturers? Is it all about their contributions to their campaign so that they can only think of themselves and remaining in office? And I'm sorry, I meant to say Joe Keener. Okay, Joe Keener's question was, Andrea, I'll get to you in a second. Joe was, why do you think the U.S. didn't promote world peace when the Soviet Union disbanded and the U.S. was the only so-called superpower? So the two questions are, the peace dividend from the collapse of the Soviet Union, why didn't that happen? And then why are our politicians so supportive of arms manufacturers? And then we'll get to Andrea's question.
Well, as far as, I guess I would say, back when I worked as a Quaker lobbyist in Washington, I mean, there were many Senate members of the Senate and the House that really were statespeople. And George McGovern and Mark Hatfield and Frank Church and Fulbright, etc. And that was before unlimited money could go into buying politicians. And so the people that we have now in Congress, so many of them are indentured servants, so to speak, to their contributors, And I mean, I live in San Francisco, where Nancy Pelosi is our congressperson, but she, votes for every war that's ever been proposed, and went to Taiwan to make that a very, very dangerous hotspot, and has no town meetings and doesn't even have an office in San Francisco. And she gets large contributions from somebody other than us, ordinary people here. And so money in politics has corrupted things a lot. And the military industrial complex has been very smart in dividing its work on weapons and bombers and jets and all the rest of it, all to every congressional district in the country. And so there are those jobs, as well as the financial contributions. And I think back when I was in Washington, there was one military lobbyist for every member of Congress. And now there's about 5 or 6 for every member of Congress. They're handing out money, et cetera. So that's one part of it. It's why we didn't have a peace dividend. I mean, that's a $64,000 question. My last job at the American Foreign Service Committee was working for what we call the common agenda, with all the groups and people that could benefit by ending the wars and declaring a massive peace dividend to the American people. Well, I think the people that are supposedly representing us in Washington we're still of the old camp of Cold Warriors. And, who's the new enemy? And, I mean, which was an absolutely tragic decision for all of us, and has stolen trillions and trillions of dollars from the American people that could have built a better life, could have helped prevent the climate crisis from getting as far as it has toward, I mean, the World Beyond War just put up billboards in different parts of the country which say 3% of the US military budget could end starvation in the whole world. Well, how much safer we would be if we decided to end starvation in the world. I mean, it's a different way of getting security than making our nuclear stockpile much greater. And then I think we need peace conversion of our economy. And the same money that's going into the Pentagon, and half of what we give the Pentagon actually goes directly to military contractors. That same money, if used for environment, for schools, for medical, for all kinds, for a climate crisis, would create many, many more jobs. And that's another piece of education that has to happen. Killing people and preparing to kill more people and maybe ending civilization on our planet is not the best way to get jobs, even if jobs is what our most important criteria is. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us.
Okay,
So
I think,
I
sorry, go
want
ahead.
to just thank all of you for being a part of this discussion, and I hope it's been helpful. And
I got to get into Andrea's question. Maybe you can answer it in one word. David, do you think Biden has the power to stop Israel's onslaught of Gaza and the West Bank?
Yes.
Okay.
Today or tomorrow. If we said we're shipping no more arms, we're not going to veto any more resolutions at the UN, and we are demanding that you stop the bombing of the people of Gaza and the killing. And I think it was Reagan did do that in Lebanon. Made a phone call to whoever the president was at that point, said, stop the war. They stopped it that day. Well, Biden could do that too.
So
and maybe the demonstrations happening all across the country and around the world are going to bring some good sense into our politicians.
Well, on that upbeat note, I want to thank you, David, for the very elucidating and interesting discussion. And Marty, I'm going to turn it back over to you at this point.
okay, yes, I just wanted to remind people that we would like very much to get this speech out as widely as possible. And if people have ideas about how it could be shared, our committee is more than willing to help you. And I did put my email in the chat so people could write to me. I wanted to let you know that next month we will be doing our webinar with Dennis Kucinich, who's running as an independent in Ohio for Congress. And he will be our speaker, our commentator on April 10th. And on May 10th, Susan Schnall, who's the national president of Veterans for Peace, will be our commentator. So we'll be sending out a follow-up to everyone who registered for this event, which will have that information in it. And we look forward to continuing contact with you. And thank you again very much for everyone who attended.
Thank you.